In this chapter, we're going to look at different exporting options in SketchUp. The first one is exporting out as an image. Let's first go and click on the stairs scene so that we can create a rendering of this view here. To export out as an image, first go to File, Export, and then select 2D Graphic. Make sure your file format is set to JPEG and go to Options. You can adjust the width and height of the image, as well as make sure that the anti-alias is checked. That's going to render the edges of the lines in SketchUp to be more crisp. And of course, just make sure you're setting your compression to the best quality. I'm going to render out to 1600 by 900 since that's the typical resolution I like to use when doing these quick renderings. Go ahead and click OK. And let's just name this rendering 1. You'll see a status screen come up. Depending on the model complexity, this may take a couple seconds. If shadows are turned on and if you're using styles, in some cases it could take a couple minutes, but it's usually pretty quick. The other way that you can export images is by exporting out as a PNG. So instead of JPEG, select PNG and go to Options. This gives you the ability to save out the background as a transparent element. So in Photoshop, this would give the alpha transparency so that you don't have to delete that white fill that you would see in most cases of the background of the image here. Let's just call this front of house. One last trick when you're exporting JPEGs. Click on the scene to look at the stairs. And let's double click on our staircase. Now let's say you just want to export the staircase and notice we have Hide Rest of Model activated. Go to File, Export, and save this as an image. Let's call this staircase. So let's take a look at the images in our Finder. So here we have rendering 1. We have the front of house PNG. And you can actually see that alpha transparency because you can see SketchUp running behind the image. And then lastly, just the staircase. So this is great if you ever just want to call attention to this detail, or if you're creating a composite montage kind of rendering, you can import this in as a separate object in Photoshop and then overlay your different elements. That's pretty much it for exporting images. Let's move on and show you some other exporting options. We can also export our model as a DWG that we can view in AutoCAD. Let's click on the first floor plan. It's also important to note that this exporting option is for SketchUp Pro only. So this will not work with SketchUp Make, which is the free version of SketchUp. What you want to do here is export as a 2D graphic. Set your format as DWG. Make sure you go to Options. And there are various exporting options that you can adjust. For example, if you don't want profile lines to be thick, you can adjust the width of those. You can then click OK. And let's call this Plan. And again, it'll run through a status, exporting the model. Should only take a couple seconds depending on how fast your computer is, as well as how complex the 3D model is. You can also export the section cut, and we do that the same way by going to File, Export as a 2D graphic. You can also save just the section slice itself, so this won't save all of the background information within the cut. We can take a look at what those look like in AutoCAD. So this is exporting out as a DWG, not as a section slice. And then the plan. The last way that you can export an AutoCAD file is by exporting a 3D model. And in this case, you can export it out as a 3D DWG file. And this is good if you're importing, let's say, into Revit, where you can import all of that 3D geometry. In this video, let's export our model as a KMZ file so that we can view it in Google Earth. Now you can export directly into Google Earth. Go to the Google toolbar and then click on this icon right here. That'll create a local file and save it in your temporary places in Google Earth. Now, previewing it directly from Google Earth is okay, but what we want to do is just export this so that we can send it. And you can do that by going to File Export, 3D Model, and under File Type, select Google Earth File.kmz. You can see here we can go to Options. You can actually export hidden geometry and preserve credits. Just click Export, and now it'll start to export our model. To view it in Google Earth, go ahead and launch Google Earth. You can use the free or pro version of Google Earth. And go to File, Open. Another way in which we can export SketchUp models is by exporting them out as a .dae file. And this is a collada file. Collada files are essentially universal 3D models. They export the 3D geometry as well as textures of the model that can be Exporting a SketchUp model is pretty simple, but there are a couple tools and tricks that you'll need to learn along the way. First, to export an animation, you need SketchUp Pro. If you don't have SketchUp Pro, you can view your animation just by clicking between your scene transitions. The only drawback to this is you'll have some lag between scenes, and for really complex models, it's just not going to cut it. Now, as you notice, when I click on the next scene, there's a transition time between each scene. In an animation, there's also a delay or pause time between each scene, and you can see that a little bit better when you right-click on a scene and click Play Animation. To adjust the scene transition time as well as the delay time, you want to go to Window Model Info. Now let's make the transition time 6 seconds. And we want to pause at each scene for approximately 3 seconds. That will really slow down this animation and truly give us a sense of what the space looks and feels like. And it's not moving at a pace that's so fast that we can't really understand everything that's going on. To export this, just go to File, Export, select Animation. You can set the format. In most cases, I just use this .mp4. However, if you're on a PC, you may see an AVI. That's just as comparable. Go to Options. And here you can set the resolution that you want. I typically like to start at 720p. You can then set the frame rate. And as a draft, I'll always start at 15 just to see how long the animation will take to finish. You can set it to loop back to the starting scene if you prefer. This is great for sun studies. It'll continually loop. Or maybe if you have an animation that you're showing as a backdrop or as a screensaver, you can always have it loop back to that first scene. Like with JPEGs, make sure anti-alias is checked on. And simply click OK. And then click Export. You'll see the status screen come up. In the status screen, you'll see the frames that it's rendered and the total number of frames that are in the animation. Lastly, it'll just give you an approximate duration that it'll take for this animation to export. And 14 minutes, that's pretty typical with the computer that I'm running right now. A lot of the frame renderings really depend on how detailed your geometry is, because it has to pause at each one of those frames, snapshot it, and then move on to the next frame. When it's finished, it'll show up wherever you saved it, and then you can play it from there. That wraps up this chapter on exporting options. In the next chapter, let's take a look at how to create a rendering composite of several different scene styles that are pulled together into Photoshop to create one image overlay.